My name is Jane Rickards. I was in a cult for 3 years in the early 90s, 1990s. It was a religious cult. The person was an American, but he styled himself as Buddha Maitreya. But he didn't start off like that, of course. He was just a regular guy who was out to try and help all of us get our acts together, basically, in the sense of good relationships, good working to heal ourselves and heal the planet, and that was what interested me. I didn't know a great deal about so-called planetary healing at the time, but that was really what my draw was to him. And he was so charismatic. You really felt that he had, dare I say, love issuing out of his eyes. He was just amazing, and he was just a regular guy. Didn't put himself up to be anybody at all. He used his Christian name, but he just wanted to help, and at least that's what he said. So I was drawn to his meetings in London, went to 2 or 3 and just thought, I really like what he's saying. I had quite a background of so-called esoteric stuff, which was like based on the theosophy tradition, theosophical tradition. It's basically a weird form of Christianity, updated, and includes all the Buddhist stuff as well, and other stuff, just to praise it. But he was well versed in that, and it was a language that I knew, so I thought, I'm in the right place here. I'd already had a brush with trying to... I actually did ordination training for the church prior to this time, but they didn't like me. They obviously thought I wasn't the right material for them, and I was devastated when they basically suggested I didn't continue with the ordination training, and I think that's what really kicked me out on my trajectory of wanting to find out more about other ways of so-called helping and speaking about such matters, you know, the important matters like loving your neighbour, loving and being a good person. And all these things now make me slightly cringe, but that was what I was at then.
Okay, Jane, thank you so much for talking to us on Talk Beliefs. So you just gave us an introduction about your time in this particular cult. Now, you were in London at the time, and you decided to go to art college, isn't that right? What made you decide to go to art college? And then tell us what happened after art college, or I should say during art college.
I was doing a postgraduate diploma. I'd been to art school before, many years before, doing a degree in sculpture, but after my marriage broke up and I got kicked out of the church, I thought I just got to get back to myself. So I took myself, well, I of course applied and got a place to do, say, this diploma, postgraduate.
And you were
diploma.
in a Christian church, weren't you, for a while?
Yes, but it was a very short time. But it was a safe place for me. I'd been very frightened beforehand. Some years before, I'd come across a very, very frightening person who was doing, I have to call it black magic stuff, which really scared me. I'd always been frightened of that side of things all through my life, and I hate to say it, but I was drawn because this person said he would teach me how to learn how to better deal with myself and use my own energy better, you know, to be better.
What sort of person would you say that you were in those days?
I've always been a slight outsider to general society. I'd felt, you know, a loner, classic loner. I was an artist. I was lonely, and of course you know, I had a bit of a dodgy childhood in the sense, like many, you know, didn't get a great deal of attention. So, but I was always very sensitive to, as I now know, you know, darker energies, and I was determined as I grew up to get over this fear of what is called loosely the occult. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it was something that I was just, I just knew I had to get over it, and that's why I sort of educated myself about the occult, and I thought I was okay. I thought I was bigger than it, that I could face up to these dark things, but of course they're not dark. Yeah. Initially.
And so you were in art college for a while, and this was after, of course, you had met up with these people you described, but you felt, I think you said you had felt a bit more freedom, so you explored by going to talks and lectures and things like that, and that's when you discovered...
Well, this person who put himself up eventually to be God.
Wow.
You know, that's where it came to. Initially he was a Buddha, then he was Jesus, but ultimately he styled himself to be God. And but by then, I mean, that's a long way down the line, and I was brainwashed by then, and totally accepted that was the case.
Can you describe what he was, when you first saw this individual, what you thought of him?
Well, on his posters for his talks, he put himself up as an American Indian shaman. Yeah. And as I was in the mood, or the phase of investigating various routes, not to join anything, but just to learn, you know, because I was feeling a bit sort of defiant. I was fed up with being kicked out of this, you know, the church thing, and I was just thought, well, blow you lot, you know, I want to find out a lot more about what else is going on. And that was my mood at the time, so that's why I went along. And I had never met an American Indian shaman before, and I thought it'd be a grizzly old man with a, you know, a grey beard, sort of all very wise, but of course he wasn't.
And that certainly wasn't what he looked like.
No, he was just a regular guy. He did have a ponytail, so that's, but you know, a lot of people have ponytails. But he was just, you know, quite an ordinary sort of bloke. He was big.
These occultists that you'd met earlier, you didn't at all think, oh, he's another one of them. He was somehow he seemed different.
Exactly. He was not putting himself up to be anything other than an ordinary guy.
And he looked ordinary.
And he looked ordinary. He wasn't wearing any of the kit that he later wore, anything so-called religious. He was just wearing, I don't know, t-shirt and trousers, trainers, that kind of stuff.
So you related to him, I guess, in a sense that he's just one of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was how he put himself over. Guy next door sort of bloke, you know, who just happened to have an ability to heal, because he did talk about healing a lot, and he seemed to be able to do it, and he just wanted to help us heal. And ultimately his line was, if we all got our acts together, you know, we weren't so screwed up with our own little dramas, psychodramas, we could be more effective human beings, and therefore be better in the planet.
And you said he seemed to be able to do it. So did you actually witness any healing,
not at
or
that
supposed
time,
healing?
No, but he claimed that he could. And of course that was another hook at that time, because at that time anybody who said anything about healing was like, wow, how amazing. You know, I didn't know. Since then I've trained myself. I know a lot more about energy and healing and how it works, as much as we know. So it's not a mystery anymore, but then it was a mystery to me. And I thought he must be good. Anybody who could heal, I thought, must be good. And that's another myth. They don't, you know, anybody can heal. They don't have to be good people to do that.
But you could have still at that stage have walked out.
I could.
But he said something to you which really just hooked you, didn't he?
After 2 or 3 meetings, I didn't talk to him. I didn't talk to anybody. I just stayed on the back benches, basically. But I got a bit more courageous, and the break of one of the meetings, I asked him a question about a friend. I was concerned for her. She was very ill. And he said, oh, she's all right. she's fine. But then he looked at me. This is the first time I really had eye-to-eye contact with his big brown eyes that were just, I thought was, you know, just full of love, as I thought. And he just said, yeah, she's fine, but you're the one. You're strong. You can help me a lot. And those were his words. I do even now get a rush of, because you see, all I ever wanted to do was, classically, was to be useful. And I knew that I was strong. I knew that I had a role somewhere, I thought. So that was the hook. Because I was a sculptor, that was the other reason he was interested in me, because I was good with materials, and he was devising the objects that he used, the tools, as he called them, to help you align yourself. All these sacred geometric tools. And
you could physically make these tools, and they were pyramids and things like that, weren't they?
He was prototyping them at that time.
Yeah.
So I was very useful in that respect, because I knew how to, you know, I was practical. I could weld, I could solder and put stuff together. So he was, you know, that was my use initially at that time.
Is that something that he did? He found people who he felt had a talent that he could use?
Yes.
To further the group?
Definitely. But most of the people in his inner circle were networkers at that time, because of course he was trying to expand his platform. But of course you must also say he was attracting people with lots of money to fund him.
Yes, because you said at one point they all moved over to Hawaii and they lived in rented hotels and things like that, and somebody had to pay for that.
Exactly, yes.
And somebody had to pay for all the LSD they were taking at night. We have to talk about that a bit, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, exactly. So that was why he was wanting to get into that, you know, attracting rich people, basically. And for a time he did do that in London. You know, there were some well-known people. I mean, I recognised, you know, 2 or 3 celebrities. I don't think they lasted very long, because they probably saw through him. But yes, he really wanted your credit card.
It wasn't like with Scientology, it's like, yes, they have the money, but it also, they think, gives them sort of credibility.
Well, that is yes. It builds, doesn't it? That, you know, he needed he was trying to create a platform, and he needed backing. He needed other people to see him. He needed famous people to give him credibility, and that's how it worked. That's what that London scene did for a few months. Like I say, there were celebrities. I can't mention their names.
And you're going to have to talk about you being the battery.
I know. I know
it must seem silly now, but
no, it doesn't actually, because I know more now. I understand more about what was actually going on.
Because, okay, just to set the scene, okay, one of these geometric forms, which I assume you helped build, the pyramids, you would sit inside of.
Yeah.
And meditate, and he would call you the battery, the engine of this thing. But you did actually feel sort of a buzzing in your head.
I did. I have to say, you do feel this energy. You do feel like you're a battery. You know, I often get a fizzing sensation on the top of my head. And that's all self-generated. Well, it's not even generated. It's just, as I've learned, you're just lining up with your natural energy field. Because that's all it is. But it's amazing. But it's nothing more than that. But that's what he was tapping into. That's what I'm
just wondering why he thought these batteries were important, because I think of the Atheist Society based in London. They have prayer batteries. They pray over these boxes and fill them with energy for use later.
Oh, wow.
For good purposes.
Well, his story was that he styled it on like Star Wars, because at that time he set himself up to be Jesus, but the cosmic Christ. He'd gone beyond just the terrestrial Christ. And his job, as he put it, was to fight the aliens. Because he's really out on it now, you know, the LSD trips. I wasn't allowed to take I took it once, but not for these things, not for these nightly sojourns in the pyramids.
You didn't want to take it, did you? They kind of forced you to.
No, because I cannot take drugs of any kind. But I had to take ordinary dope, but that was bad enough. But the men took LSD. So what he would do, he would put himself up as being in charge of the spaceships. These were all we had several pyramids on the beach. These were the spaceships, and that they would go out and fight the aliens, and that was their job. They went out on these nightly missions, and of course the menfolk really believed it, you know, and they had great times.
Well, it's like video games,
because they were all high. Yeah, they were all high, and it was rare for a woman to be involved in that scenario, but he brought me in because he said, you're the battery, you're the one who can energize all this.
Okay, at some point, Jane, it was decided that you were his true wife, even though he was already married at the time. Yes. So this started things off, which led to panic attacks and that kind of thing. Will you tell us about this period in the group?
Yeah, well, it follows on from what we were just saying. He got the thing that I was somehow the power source, or for his nightly excursions into the alien you know, the cosmos, basically. Yeah. Into space. And I think it was in that, perhaps it's in one of those sort of trips, because they were trips, LSD trips, that he thought I was more. You know, he had this idea that actually I was more. I was then asked to supply my astrological details. There was an astrologer in the group at that time. So I was asked for my details. I knew them as much as I did, because I'd had a chart read before. And they immediately cast a chart for me, and he went wild over this astrological chart, saying, yep, you're the one. Because I had a great big cross in the middle, basically. That'll do it, you know. So that's apparently what clinched it. That this astrologer had said, yeah, she's this, and this. So, wow. And that's why he decided, actually, I was the one. And the fact that I hadn't been pushing myself forward, you know, I was quite the opposite. I was totally dumbfounded with all of this stuff. I was just, you know, I was much happier sweeping up the crumbs from under the table, that kind of scenario. I wasn't aiming to be in this sort of limelight situation.
Now, what about your family at the time? Did you have any contact with them at all, or did they know what was going on?
Not a great deal, no. My mum was worried. Before I went to Hawaii, she obviously was very worried. But in my usual way, I overrode her, and she never stopped me doing anything. And they didn't stop you from contacting your family, which happens in cults? It became that disconnection. It did. That came later. Now, the real problem seemed to start when you were told by the leader that all the troubles of the world were on your shoulders. Yeah. And it was up to you to stay in and keep doing the work that you were doing. And basically you felt like, well, I can't leave. Yeah. And that's when the panic attacks came in, and that's eventually when you decided, I've got to get out. When he first said that I was, by then he was Jesus, as I've said. So if I was his consort, I was therefore Mary. So I had to take that on. Or if he was Buddha, I was Tara. You know, it didn't really matter what religion it was, because by then he'd taken them all under his belt. But I was the female consort, and I had to take that on. And of course I thought, what? You know, kidding me? But I had to, because as I learnt later about mind control, is that you do what you're told. You've been so twisted, because by then I really was. You know, for some months I knew. In retrospect, I could see that I was being mind controlled by that time. And I've learned that you actually do what you're told, because it's the way the brain can survive. It's like you're in a survival mode, so you have to do what you're told. If you rebel, you know you're very, very vulnerable. This is what I've learned later on. Yeah. But at the time I didn't know that. But so I was in this real battle I thought, I'm just me. I'm just Jane. But I had to believe what he told me, because I had to survive. And of course that sounds like an excuse now, but that is the truth of it. And I took it on board, and for about 3 days, I called it like the honeymoon period, you're on a high. So anyway, but for about 3 days it was okay. Then the rot set in, you know, the real fear began, because that's when he started to say to me, look, you've got to really control yourself, you've got to keep your mind straight, you've got to really be good.
So could he see that you were starting to panic a bit?
Yes, because of the doubt.
Yeah.
And
so he knew you were doubting, I guess.
Yeah, and of course he would be used to that, as I later learned, because he'd been through this scenario many times before, but I didn't know that at the time, of course. So he could see that. So the threat was, if I in any way doubted or in any way let the dark side get into me, become possessed by the dark side, that it would magnify out into the world, because I was mother of the world. Therefore, by implication, I was responsible for the downfall of the world. I was the arch enemy of the world, the arch demon, in female form, and that was what he put on me, and that's why I had to behave myself and not in any way doubt him, because if I did, I would be responsible for the downfall, and that's a hell of a weight to carry. And I believed it. I have to say, I did believe it. I had to. Because I had no alternative.
But something led you to leave. Did you leave yourself, or did they shove you out?
After a few months of that intensity, and then the panic attack started, as you mentioned, and I was beginning to really lose it. My health started to break down, and I was unable to function. And that's when he then started to, as I now know, well, he was already having sexual relations with the others, but I didn't know that then. I thought it was still just me, because that was also forced, of course. But he was then obviously looking around for another consort.
Yes.
So I was gradually being demoted by then, because I was being, I was useless. Being
phased out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was very glad to be, because I was gone. We'd been travelling around India, we were travelling around Nepal, and I was so ill, and eventually I was told to leave.
How did they tell you?
Well, by fax, by that, because we didn't have
really?
email. We didn't.
I was going to say, did they email you?
No, we were still pre-email. So it was actually the real clincher was he was due to come back over to England. We had to prepare we had a house in London that had been turned over into a temple, completely kitted out. A very rich woman had given her place over to him. It had all been redone, and we had to repaint it for his visit. I'd been there for a long time. I'd lived there myself. But the point is, I couldn't do it because I was too ill. I couldn't do the painting. I was sick. And he used that as an excuse to say, that therefore is Lilith. If she can't create a place for me...
Lilith meaning an evil female...
The evil female deity.
Being, yeah.
That was proof that I was actually showing my true colours, because if I couldn't even pick up a paintbrush and make the place good... and that was what he used as the context to actually... Yeah. But not him personally, it was always done by the minions. But
it was you and a close colleague, I think, another female member, who were kicked out at about the same time.
Yeah,
but
right.
She kind of came to your rescue in a way when she told you about a certain book.
She did, because her parents had done the right thing and got all the information about cults from the various places that you can, the organisations. So they knew that he was a bad guy, and they did everything by the book. So when she got kicked out for various, her own reason, she went to a family that were totally genned up, so that she didn't have this problem about what to do, where to go, that confusion. And so she quickly got the deprogramming, and she sent me a book by post about cults. Basically, it was called Captive Hearts, Captive Minds. You can still get it, I think. And she sent it to me, and I couldn't believe it when it arrived. We were always being challenged that we were a cult, but we knew we weren't. Everybody else was, but we weren't, because he was the real guy.
But this book spelt it out,
basically. This book spelt it out on the very first page. It's a tick box thing. Have you just been in a group that does this, you know, like 10 questions, and of course I could tick yes to every one of them. And at the end, if you tick at least 5 or whatever, you know, you've probably just been in a cult.
And you thought this was all invented uniquely for the group you were in,
exactly,
perhaps, and here it was in a textbook.
Here it was in a book,
yeah,
talking about the mechanics of mind control.
And did you look at other groups then? Did you say, well, let's see what, you know, Scientologists believe? And
well, at the time I was so devastated I didn't, but of course later on I started to educate
and you can
myself.
see lots of similarities and parallels now,
definitely.
probably.
Yeah, because the mechanics are the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you learn about, you know, brainwashing.
And you did have to go to, I think, a psychotherapist, was that right, afterwards?
Well, yeah, I was, because I didn't know what to do or where to go, I was actually looking in the phone book for exit counselling, which of course in this country means bereavement counselling. It's an American term. But through that I found a psychotherapist who kindly took me on, because she wasn't really versed in cults, but she was, you know, a good person, and she took me on as a client, even though I couldn't pay her for years. I didn't have any money. Of course I was very in debt at that point.
But this is something you definitely felt you needed.
Well, I was having a nervous breakdown by then. I mean, I was gone. I was totally out of the world. I did have a really specific deprogramming session, well, several. My brother-in-law took me to Catalyst.
Yes.
And I think I don't know if they're still going, but that was the clincher.
And they're a charity, aren't they?
Yeah.
Catalyst, to help people who have been in high control groups.
Yeah. And it was that real, it was like being, I'm sitting at across a table with this guy who was just spelling it out to me. This is what mind control is, and how it's done, and how it was done to me. And it was just like being educated, and it was so necessary. That's what I'm saying. You know, it was like, because I was still so programmed at that time. You know, I was still this brain was saying, no, he's still God, you know, he's still there. I don't care what you say, he's still God. And it was specific deprogramming that got through that. Because psychotherapy won't. You know, that's a different thing. You know, it's much easier, it's much softer. It was like I was being, you know, bang, 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 bang. This is what it was, bang, bang, bang. And it was very necessary. And I was lucky to get that. And a lot of people don't get that. And that's what they need to, you know, that's what the education needs to be understood. It's not a soft thing. It's like countering this awful thing that's been done to your brain. You have to undo it. And it takes a very specific person. It takes somebody who really knows what they're doing, and probably themselves have been in a cult, so they know how tough it has to be.
So Jane, how are you feeling now? We're in your sculpture park. How are you feeling now, looking back in your days in the cult? How you were made to feel then, and how you know that you feel now?
Well, it's taken a while, but I feel actually very moved to be able to be in myself again, properly, knowing that I'm not a bad person. I think this is the main thing to really understand about how cults make you feel so bad about yourself. And actually, right from the start, if you turn the whole thing on its head and realise that they want you because you're good, you're actually a good person, whether it's your talents in certain ways or whatever it is about you that you want, actually intrinsically are a decent person, and that's why they want you. And you come out of it thinking you're the worst person in the world, and because of all the mind control and what you've allowed to be done to yourself. And the shame of that, certainly in my case, kept me down for years, even though I was working and I thought I was having a fairly successful life, I still carried that shame, and that I've only fairly recently realised, and that's what's got me on this my personal crusade to actually say there's nothing to be ashamed about. As long as you educate yourself about mind control, what you realise has happened to you, you know, either brainwashing, mind control, whatever you want to call it. Essentially, it's about realising that you were a good person, that's why they wanted you, and that you still are. Okay, so what I've come down to myself is just realising that all I can be responsible for is myself, and what I can do to keep myself straight on what I call the straight and narrow is all I'm responsible for. I just want to be straight with myself. I'm not responsible for anybody else, and nobody else is telling me what to do. And I think at the end of the day, that's all we can do, is be responsible for ourselves. And then if that helps us be a more effective human being in society, then that's fantastic. But if we start thinking we can tell other people how to live their lives because we think we know better than they do, well, certainly for me, that's out of the question.